Did France just outmaneuver the United States? The boldest economic move in decades is unfolding, and Washington is scrambling to respond. What started as a trade dispute has spiraled into a geopolitical standoff that could shift the balance of power worldwide. For years, the United States dictated global trade using its economic weight to shape policies. But this time, France played a different game, one that even the European Union did not expect. As President Emmanuel Macron made a shocking decision, the ripple effects spread beyond Europe, sending shockwaves through industries and global markets. So, what does this mean for the future of economic superpowers? Is the United States losing its grip? And more importantly, how will this impact your daily life? The answers may surprise you, and they are unfolding right now. The tariff war begins, Trump's unexpected strike. What if I told you this was the moment that changed everything? The global economy had been balancing on a precarious edge for years, but it was a single decision from the United States government that sent shockwaves through the world. The administration of Donald Trump announced sweeping tariffs on multiple trading partners, including the European Union, Canada, and China. Among all the affected nations, France was hit the hardest, setting the stage for one of the most significant economic conflicts in modern history. The justification for the tariffs was framed as a measure to protect American industries. The government insisted that European markets had long benefited from trade policies that disadvantaged the United States. The targeted industries range from steel and aluminum to high-end luxury goods. Overnight, French exports to the United States faced an economic wall that threatened their profitability. The response from France was swift and unyielding. European leaders scrambled to understand the full implications of the tariffs. France, in particular, was at the forefront of the outrage, viewing the move as a direct economic attack. The immediate backlash was palpable, with business leaders warning of severe consequences for industries on both sides of the Atlantic. French officials took to global platforms to denounce the action, while European Union representatives began urgent discussions on potential countermeasures. But no one expected France's next move. Macron's defiant response: France fires back. France was not about to sit back and take the hit. The administration of Emmanuel Macron made it clear that the country would not be intimidated by economic pressure. In a bold and unprecedented speech, Macron addressed the nation, declaring that France would stand firm in the face of protectionist policies. He called for a united European front against the United States, emphasizing that no single country should dictate the rules of global trade. France wasted no time in responding. The government quickly implemented its own economic countermeasures, targeting American exports with precise retaliatory tariffs. High-demand products, including agricultural goods, luxury items, and key industrial imports from the United States, faced steep levies. French companies, particularly in the aerospace and automobile sectors, braced for impact, but they remained steadfast in supporting the national strategy. The European Union was stunned by the decisiveness of France's actions. While many leaders had expected a cautious approach, Macron had instead chosen direct confrontation. The surprise response set off a wave of reactions across the continent. Countries that had previously been hesitant to take a firm stance against the United States found themselves reevaluating their positions. The bold retaliation by France shifted the narrative and forced the European Union to reassess its strategy. And then something even bigger happened. The EU's divided stance: unity or chaos. Is this the moment the European Union falls apart? As the dust settled from France's countermeasures, a new battle emerged, not between France and the United States, but within the European Union itself. While Macron called for immediate and unified retaliation, other European leaders urged caution. Germany, heavily reliant on trade with the United States, advocated for diplomatic negotiations rather than economic warfare. Poland, seeking to maintain strong transatlantic relations, hesitated to endorse aggressive countermeasures. The internal divide was growing. Some nations supported Macron's aggressive stance, seeing it as a necessary assertion of European sovereignty. Others worried that escalating the trade conflict would ultimately harm European businesses more than it would impact the United States. The uncertainty led to tense negotiations behind closed doors as European Union leaders debated their next steps. At the heart of the division was a fundamental question: should Europe prioritize economic unity or individual national interests? The disagreement exposed fault lines within the European Union that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. The response to the tariffs was not just about trade, it was a test of the European Union's ability to act as a single entity in times of crisis. And just as the European Union hesitated, France took matters into its own hands. The game-changing move: France shifts to China. No one saw this coming. As tensions with the United States escalated, France made a bold and unexpected move. The government of Emmanuel Macron announced new strategic partnerships with China, signaling a significant shift in global economic alliances. The decision was more than just a response to the tariffs. It was a calculated maneuver to reduce dependence on American trade and strengthen economic ties with a rising global superpower. China, eager to expand its influence in European markets, welcomed France's outreach with open arms. High-level negotiations between the two nations led to agreements on key industries, including energy, technology, and transportation. Chinese investment in French infrastructure surged, and French exports to China increased significantly. The move sent a clear message to the United States. France was not only resisting economic pressure, but was actively forging new paths to maintain its economic stability. The repercussions of France's pivot to China extended beyond economics. It marked a geopolitical shift that sent shockwaves through international relations. The United States, previously confident in its economic leverage over France, now faced a new reality. By aligning with China, France had introduced an entirely new dynamic to the trade war, complicating the strategies of all involved parties. And this was not just about trade, this was about power. The decision to embrace China as a strategic partner placed France at the center of a global economic realignment. It challenged the dominance of the United States in European markets and reshaped the future of international trade relations. The stage was set for a new era of economic diplomacy, and the world was watching closely. The US reacts. Washington's worst fear comes true. The White House is in panic mode. The moment France pivoted toward China, the United States government realized it was facing an economic crisis far worse than it had anticipated. What was initially viewed as a simple trade dispute had now evolved into a full-fledged global realignment. Washington's fear was not just about France. It was about the domino effect that was about to unfold across the world. France's decision to strengthen economic ties with China meant that the United States had just lost a significant European ally in its battle against Beijing's growing influence. The White House responded immediately, with officials scrambling to mitigate the damage. Statements were released emphasizing that France's decision was short-sighted and detrimental to Western unity. However, the words did little to calm the markets, as American corporations, particularly those in the technology and defense sectors, faced the unsettling reality of losing access to one of Europe's largest economies. The pressure on American corporations intensified. Major multinational companies that relied on trade agreements with France suddenly found themselves in a vulnerable position. The automobile industry, aviation sector, and agricultural exports were all hit hard. The response from investors was immediate. The stock market wavered, with shares of key industries experiencing sharp declines. But this was just the beginning of a much bigger fallout. The ripple effect. Other nations follow France's lead. France just started a revolution the moment it defied the United States and sought economic security elsewhere. Other nations began reconsidering their reliance on American trade policies. Canada, Germany, and several other allies found themselves at a crossroads. Should they continue to abide by the economic strategies set forth by Washington, or should they follow France's lead and seek greater autonomy? Canada, already frustrated with the United States tariffs on aluminum and steel, accelerated its trade negotiations with China. Germany, the economic powerhouse of Europe, took a more cautious but equally strategic approach by increasing its engagement with Asian markets. Even smaller European nations, typically aligned with the United States, started questioning their dependence on American-led economic strategies. For the United States, this was a nightmare scenario. The global economic order that had long been dominated by Washington was now being redefined. The concern among American policymakers was not just about trade, it was about losing leverage. If the European Union and other nations strengthened their economic ties with China, the United States would find itself isolated in a world where economic power dictated political influence. But Trump had one last card to play. Trump doubles down, a new wave of tariffs. Trump refused to back down, but was this his biggest mistake yet? Determined to show strength, the United States announced a new wave of tariffs targeting France and other European nations that had shown signs of distancing themselves from American economic influence. The tariffs were aggressive, impacting industries that were vital to the European economy: automobiles, luxury goods, and agricultural products. The move sent shockwaves across global markets. The European Union, already struggling to maintain unity, faced internal debates over how to respond. Some leaders advocated for retaliatory tariffs, while others urged caution, warning that an all-out trade war would be detrimental to both sides. The stock market reacted with uncertainty. While some American industries saw temporary gains, others faced increased pressure as supply chains were disrupted. The technology sector in particular took a hit as European countries began reconsidering their reliance on American firms for software and cybersecurity solutions. The economic war was turning into a geopolitical battle. The unexpected backlash, US industries start to crack, and here's where things get really bad. For America, the economic war that was meant to demonstrate American dominance was now revealing significant weaknesses within the country's own industries. As tariffs took effect, American companies and farmers began feeling the consequences. The agricultural sector was among the first to suffer, with France and other European nations cutting back on American imports. Farmers found themselves with surplus products that had nowhere to go. Soybeans, dairy, and meat exports, once a major source of revenue, began piling up in storage facilities. The government attempted to provide financial aid, but the losses continued to mount. The automobile industry faced its own crisis. European tariffs on American-made cars made them significantly more expensive, reducing sales across the continent. Factories in key manufacturing states were forced to cut production, leading to layoffs and economic instability. Supply chain disruptions added to the chaos. Companies that relied on parts from Europe faced increased costs, which were inevitably passed on to consumers. Prices of everyday goods started to rise, fueling inflation and putting pressure on American households. But then, a major shift in global alliances changed everything. The European Union's response, backing France or abandoning it. The European Union faced a defining moment. France had thrown down the gauntlet, standing up to the aggressive economic tactics of the United States. Now, its neighbors had a choice: stand with France in defiance or distance themselves to protect their own economic stability. The dilemma revealed deep fractures within the European Union, where each nation had its own priorities, fears, and economic dependencies. Germany, the economic engine of the European Union, found itself in a difficult position. As a major exporter, particularly to the United States, it had more to lose than most if the trade war escalated further. German officials argued for caution, insisting that dialogue with Washington was still the best course of action. The chancellor warned that aligning too closely with France's retaliatory measures could provoke even harsher trade barriers that would cripple European manufacturing and exports. Italy and Spain, two nations still recovering from economic instability, were also wary of a prolonged confrontation. Their governments hesitated, concerned that escalating tensions would trigger another financial downturn. With high unemployment rates and fragile economic growth, they sought a middle path, one that would keep them within the European Union's unity but prevent direct confrontation with the United States. However, France was not alone. Belgium and the Netherlands, both dependent on trade but also committed to European integration, backed France's position. They saw Trump's tariffs not as an attack on France alone, but as an attack on the European Union as a whole. To them, standing down would only encourage further economic aggression from Washington in the future. Poland and Hungary, despite being strong allies of the United States in military matters, viewed the situation with growing concern. While they were reluctant to anger Washington, they also understood that their economies were deeply tied to the European Union's stability. A divided European Union would be weaker in any future negotiations, so they advocated for a unified response even if it meant economic risks in the short term. The internal struggle reached its peak when European Union leaders convened an emergency meeting in Brussels. France urged immediate action, calling for countermeasures that would send a clear message to Washington. Germany and Italy pushed for continued negotiations, while Poland and Hungary sought a compromise. The final decision was a diplomatic balancing act. Europe would not escalate the trade war, but would implement protective measures to shield key industries from the fallout. This approach, however, did not satisfy everyone, and it left the door open for the next global player to step in. But no one expected what happened next. China seizes the opportunity. A new superpower emerges. While the West was locked in economic turmoil, China saw its moment. With tensions high between the United States and the European Union, Beijing moved swiftly to position itself as the world's stabilizing economic force. France, feeling isolated in its battle, found an unexpected ally in China, and what followed shifted the global balance of power. China extended an economic lifeline to France, offering trade agreements that would reduce dependence on the United States. New deals were signed covering high-tech industries, energy, and infrastructure. Beijing welcomed French industries with open arms, securing long-term partnerships in sectors ranging from aviation to telecommunications. This move provided France with an alternative market and reinforced China's growing influence in Europe. For years, China had been searching for ways to deepen its presence in the European market, and now the opportunity was presenting itself. The Belt and Road Initiative, which had already made inroads across Asia and Africa, now had a renewed focus on Europe. Beijing increased its investments in European infrastructure, from ports to high-speed rail systems, solidifying economic ties. This shift sent shockwaves through Washington. The United States had long sought to contain China's global influence, but the European Union's economic strain was providing an opening that Beijing eagerly exploited. China's leaders framed their engagement as a stabilizing force, presenting themselves as a more reliable trade partner than the unpredictable policies coming from Washington. European leaders who had previously been cautious about China's influence now saw the practical benefits of diversifying their economic ties. While Germany and Italy had resisted direct confrontation with the United States, they were not blind to the advantages of securing trade agreements with China. Soon, more European nations followed, engaging in strategic discussions with Beijing to safeguard their economies. But France was not the only one benefiting from this shift. The United States economy begins to falter, recession warning signs. Economists started sounding the alarms. The escalating trade war was no longer just a battle of policies. It was starting to show real damage in the United States economy. Initially, Washington had framed the tariffs as a necessary move to protect American jobs and industries. But the reality on the ground told a different story. American businesses, particularly those reliant on global trade, began feeling the strain. Farmers, who had already suffered from earlier trade disputes, now faced even greater uncertainty. Export-heavy industries such as technology and manufacturing struggled as European and Chinese markets pivoted away from American products. The stock market wavered as investors weighed the long-term risks of continued economic isolation. Consumer prices in the United States started to rise. The cost of imported goods, now burdened with heavy tariffs, became more expensive for American households. Major retailers warned of price hikes, and inflation concerns grew. What had once been promoted as a strategy to strengthen the American economy was now threatening to drag it into a downturn. Industries that had supported the administration's aggressive trade policies began expressing doubts. Automobile manufacturers, caught between rising production costs and falling international demand, faced declining sales. Supply chain disruptions forced businesses to reevaluate their strategies, and some even considered relocating production overseas to avoid tariffs. The pressure on Washington mounted. Political opposition within the United States grew, with lawmakers calling for a reassessment of the trade war's long-term viability. Business leaders lobbied for a return to negotiations, arguing that continued economic isolation would be unsustainable. The administration, however, refused to back down. And just when it seemed things could not get worse, they did. The energy war begins. France and Canada's new strategy. The next battlefield, energy. France and Canada, both facing economic pressure from the trade war, began exploring a bold strategy, reducing their energy exports to the United States. This move, if fully realized, had the potential to trigger a full-scale economic crisis in Washington, affecting everything from transportation to industrial production. Canada, a primary supplier of oil and natural gas to the United States, found itself at a crossroads. With rising tensions over tariffs, policymakers in Ottawa began reconsidering their dependency on the American market. Discussions began about increasing energy exports to European nations, providing an alternative to Russian energy. This strategic realignment would not only strengthen Canada's global influence, but would also weaken Washington's leverage over its northern neighbor. Meanwhile, France, leveraging its role in European energy markets, pushed for stronger cooperation within the European Union to reduce reliance on American energy sources. With growing Chinese investment in energy infrastructure, the possibility of diversifying energy imports away from the United States became a tangible reality. The United States, already struggling with rising costs and economic uncertainty, now faced the prospect of an energy crisis. If Canada and France followed through on their strategies, it would mean higher fuel costs, supply shortages, and increased pressure on American industries. This was no longer just about trade, it was about survival. With global power shifting and economic alliances being rewritten, one thing became clear: the world order was changing, and Washington's dominance was no longer guaranteed. Washington scrambles. Can the United States reverse the damage? the White House faced an impossible choice. With economic uncertainty mounting and political pressure intensifying, American leaders found themselves in a desperate scramble to contain the fallout from the escalating trade conflict. The administration was split between two competing factions, one advocating for immediate de-escalation through diplomatic engagement and economic concessions, while the other insisted on doubling down, reinforcing tariffs, and pressuring allies to isolate France. As tensions flared in Washington, the corporate world suffered. American industries reliant on European markets experienced unprecedented disruption. Automakers, agricultural exporters, and technology firms scrambled to find alternative supply chains and new trading partners. Small businesses, already stretched thin, faced surging costs and dwindling demand. Consumer confidence plummeted, fueling fears of a prolonged economic downturn. Meanwhile, public opinion became deeply divided. Some Americans viewed the crisis as a necessary struggle to reclaim economic sovereignty, while others criticized the administration for engaging in a reckless trade war. Protests erupted in major cities, calling for a resolution before the situation worsened. With elections looming, political leaders weighed their options, knowing that any misstep could alter the balance of power in Washington. But the world was not waiting for America to figure things out. France, China, and the European Union were already moving forward, establishing new trade policies and alliances that could redefine global economic structures for decades to come. The new global order, France's rise, America's struggle. Is this the end of United States economic dominance? While Washington struggled to contain the crisis, France emerged as an unexpected leader in the reshaping of global trade. President Emmanuel Macron's calculated gamble had paid off, securing new trade agreements with China and strengthening ties with the European Union. French industries, once vulnerable to American tariffs, found fresh opportunities in Asian markets and gained an edge in industries such as aerospace, automotive, and energy. The shift in power sent shockwaves through traditional economic strongholds. European allies, once hesitant to challenge the United States, began pivoting toward a more self-reliant economic strategy. Germany and Italy expanded trade agreements with France, while Spain and the Netherlands sought greater independence in energy and defense industries. The most significant turning point came with the increasing role of China. As tensions between the United States and France escalated, China positioned itself as a stabilizing force, brokering deals that reinforced its influence in both European and Asian markets. For the first time in decades, global economic leadership appeared to be shifting away from Washington, with Paris and Beijing playing increasingly dominant roles. And then, an even bigger revelation shook the world. The biggest winners and losers. Who came out on top? In every war, there are winners and losers. Here is who they were. France undeniably stood among the biggest winners. By boldly challenging the status quo, it strengthened its economy, reinforced its alliances, and positioned itself as a critical power in the next phase of global trade. The European Union, despite its initial hesitations, found itself on stronger footing, having diversified its economic strategy and reduced reliance on American trade policies. China emerged as the second major beneficiary. With the trade war weakening the economic grip of the United States, China capitalized on the shifting landscape, securing new trade routes and cementing its role as a primary trading partner for both Europe and Asia. Its influence over global supply chains grew, further challenging American economic dominance. However, not everyone came out ahead. The United States, once the unrivaled leader in global commerce, suffered a substantial blow. While it remained a major economic force, the damage to its credibility and long-term stability was undeniable. Industries that had once thrived on international exports now faced increasing isolation, and domestic businesses struggled to adjust to the new landscape. The most devastating losses, however, were felt by small businesses and the American working class. Job losses mounted, wages stagnated, and economic anxiety became a persistent reality. The ripple effects extended beyond business. American global influence was waning, and allies who once depended on Washington's leadership now looked elsewhere for economic stability. But this story is not over yet. The future of United States-France relations, can this be fixed? Will these two nations ever recover from this? The long-term impact of the trade war between the United States and France extended far beyond economic policies. Diplomatic relations suffered deep fractures, with mistrust replacing decades of strategic cooperation. While some leaders pushed for reconciliation, others remained skeptical, fearing that any future agreement could unravel just as quickly as the last. The consequences stretched into military alliances, international security strategies, and geopolitical stability. European leaders began questioning their reliance on Washington's defense policies, exploring independent military initiatives that could shift the balance of global power. As negotiations continued, one question loomed large. Was this trade war a temporary setback or the beginning of a permanent economic realignment? While the world awaited answers, one thing remained clear. This was not just a trade war. This was a battle for the future of global power, and the final outcome was still unwritten. But what do you think? Could the United States regain its footing and rebuild trust with its European allies? Or had this conflict marked the beginning of a new era where American influence would continue to decline? Let's know your thoughts down in the comments below. Thanks for watching.